The war room was dark except for the glowing blue light from the giant screen. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in front of it, looking at hundreds of red dots scattered across space. Each dot was an enemy ship. They had been in the same spots for over a year now. 212 years, said Commander Lisa Carter. She was reading from a thick report. We have been fighting this war for 212 years. Jake shook his head. It was hard to believe. The war between the Galactic Alliance and the Corvani Empire had been going on longer than most planets had records. Huge battleships would move slowly into position, shoot at each other from far away, then go back to base to fix their damage. This happened over and over again. Captain Ben Rodriguez was the only human on the ship. He watched the screen differently than the aliens around him. The Thaxari officers talked about honor and tradition. The Zephyrian commanders counted numbers and calculated angles, but Ben saw something else. He saw waste. How long does one battle usually last? Ben asked Admiral Kethvar. The alien was tall and covered in blue feathers. His people had been fighting this war longer than anyone else. 6 to 8 months, Kethvar answered. His voice came through a translator device. We move forward. They move forward. We test their defenses. They test ours. Then someone pulls back to a safer place. Ben nodded. The pattern was easy to see once you looked for it. Both sides did the same things their great-great-grandparents had done. Same battle plans, same ship designs, same mistakes. While the military fought their slow war, regular people suffered. Money that could build schools and hospitals went to building warships instead. Young soldiers died in battles that changed nothing. Planets ran out of food and medicine because all the resources went to the war. The enemy Corvani were just as stuck in old ways. They believed in using massive force very slowly. They would attack one small area for months trying to wear down the defenders bit by bit. It worked, but it took forever. Ben watched as another big attack started. The Alliance ships moved into new positions very carefully and slowly. It would take weeks just to get ready to fight. Then the actual fighting would take months more. Has anyone ever tried fighting differently? Ben asked. The aliens in the room looked at him strangely. Commander Lisa laughed, but not in a happy way. Different how? She asked. This is how space wars are fought. Big ships, long battles, careful planning. But why? Ben said. Why does it have to be this way? Admiral Kethvar's feathers moved up and down. In his species, this meant he was thinking hard. Because this is how we have always done it, he said finally. Our ancestors fought this way. Their ancestors fought this way. It is the proper way to conduct warfare in space. Ben looked back at the screen. The red enemy dots and blue friendly dots sat there, barely moving. Some of those ships had been in the same positions for years. Their crews probably knew each other by now from talking on the radio during the long, boring months between fights. What? If the proper way isn't the right way? Ben asked quietly. The room went silent. Several aliens made sounds that the translator couldn't handle. Commander Lisa looked uncomfortable. The right way? Admiral Kethvar asked. What do you mean? I mean, what if there's a better way to end this war? Ben said. What if we're thinking about it all wrong? The Thaxari admiral's feathers flattened against his head. This was a sign of confusion in his people. The war will end when one side defeats the other in battle, he said. That is how wars end. That is how wars have always ended. Ben wanted to argue, but he held back. These people had been fighting the same war for over 200 years. Their great-great-grandparents had started it. Their great-great-grandchildren would probably still be fighting it if nothing changed. The worst part was that nobody even remembered what they were fighting about anymore. The original reasons for the war were lost in old history books that nobody read. Now they fought because they had always been fighting. The Corvani were the enemy because they had always been the enemy. Both sides had built their entire societies around this endless war. Millions of people worked in weapons factories. Millions more served in the military. Entire planets existed just to build warships or train soldiers. The war had become so big that nobody knew how to stop it. Every few years, someone would suggest peace talks. The talks would last a few months, then break down. Usually they broke down because neither side could agree on what peace would look like. They had been at war so long that peace seemed impossible. Ben thought about his home planet, Earth. Humans had fought many wars, but they had also learned how to end them. Sometimes you had to think outside the normal rules. Sometimes you had to try something completely new. He looked at the screen again. The dots hadn't moved in hours. They probably wouldn't move for days. This wasn't really a war anymore. It was just a very expensive, very deadly habit. "Admiral," Ben said, "what if I told you humans might have some ideas about this war?" Kethavar's feathers rose slightly. "What kind of ideas?" "Different ideas," Ben said. "Ideas that might end this war faster than anyone thinks possible." The room was quiet again. Commander Lisa looked worried. The other aliens whispered to each other in their own languages. Finally, Admiral Kethavar spoke. "How much faster?" Ben smiled for the first time in weeks. "What if I told you we could end it in less than a year?" The feathered alien stared at him. "I would say you are either very foolish or very dangerous." "Maybe both," Ben said. "But maybe that's exactly what this war needs." 3 months after Ben Rodriguez made his bold promise, the human fleet arrived at Starbase Unity. The space station was huge, bigger than most cities. It floated in empty space between star systems, serving as the main meeting place for Alliance military leaders. Admiral Susan Hayes looked out the window of her transport ship as they got closer to the station. She had been studying reports about this war for months. Every battle plan, every strategy, every failure from the past 50 years. The more she read, the more confused she became. Not because the war was complicated, but because it was so simple and stupid. "Look at that," said Commander Rick Johnson, pointing out the window. He was Hayes's best strategic planner. "Even their space station is built for defense, thick walls, heavy weapons, designed to last forever." Hayes nodded. "Everything the Alliance built was made to survive long battles. Their ships, their bases, even their uniforms were designed for wars that lasted decades. It was like they had forgotten that wars could end." The human ships looked very different from the Alliance vessels docked at the station. Where alien ships were large and heavily armored, human ships were small and fast. They looked more like racing cars than warships. "Admiral Hayes," said Captain Paul Chen, the intelligence officer, "I've been reading the Alliance military manuals. Do you know they have a rule that says every battle must last at least 3 months? "What?" Hayes looked surprised. "Why?" "Because anything shorter isn't considered a real battle," Chen explained. "They think quick fights are just skirmishes that don't matter." Hayes shook her head. No wonder this war had lasted so long. The Alliance had rules that made it impossible to win quickly. They docked at the station and walked through long corridors filled with alien soldiers. Most of them stared at the humans with curiosity. Humans were still new to the galactic community. Many aliens had never seen one before. The main meeting room was enormous. Representatives from 12 different alien species sat around a circular table. Each species had their own special chairs designed for their unique body shapes. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few looked like giant insects. Admiral Kethavar stood up when the humans entered. His blue feathers were arranged in a formal pattern that meant respect in his culture. "Welcome to the Alliance Defense Council," he said. "We are honored to have humanity join our discussions about this war." Hayes took her seat between a lizard-like Repthari and a floating gas creature from the nebula worlds. She activated the holographic display in front of her. "Thank you for inviting us," she said. "We've spent months studying your war, and we have some thoughts to share." General Zix Thala leaned forward. She was from the Volthari species, known for being very smart and logical. They had designed most of the Alliance's battle plans. "Please tell us what you think," Zixathala said. Her voice came through a translator because her species communicated through clicking sounds. Hayes looked around the table at all the alien faces watching her. Some looked hopeful, others seemed skeptical. "You're fighting the wrong war," she said simply. The room became completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Several aliens made surprised noises that the translators couldn't handle. Admiral Kethvar's feathers moved up and down rapidly. "What do you mean by this?" "Commander." Johnson stood up and activated the big screen in the center of the room. It showed a timeline of major battles from the past century. "Look at this pattern," he said. "Every single battle follows the same steps. You move your big ships here. The Corvani move their big ships there. You shoot at each other for months. Someone runs out of supplies first and retreats. Then you do it all over again somewhere else." The aliens studied the display. The pattern was so obvious when shown this way that several of them looked embarrassed. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster, Hayes's tactical expert, pulled up enemy ship designs. "The Corvani have built their entire military around fighting your style of war," she explained. "Their ships have thick armor because they expect long battles. Their weapons are designed for shooting at targets far away for months at a time. Their whole strategy depends on you fighting the way you always fight." Captain Chen added more information to the display. "Both sides know exactly what the other will do next. The Corvani commanders probably have your battle plans memorized. You've been using the same tactics for 200 years. Hayes stood up and walked to the big screen. "What if you stop doing what they expect?" The room exploded with noise. All 12 species started talking at once in their own languages. The translators gave up trying to keep up with all the different conversations happening at the same time. Some aliens sounded excited. Others sounded angry. A few sounded scared. The Repthari representative, General Systax, finally spoke loud enough to be heard over the chaos. "But this is how space wars are fought," he hissed. "This is how they have always been fought. You cannot just change the rules." "Why not?" Hayes asked. "Who made these rules?" "Tradition," Admiral Kethvar said. "Honor. The proper way of conducting warfare between civilized species." Hayes smiled. "Humans have a saying. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. You've been getting stalemate for over 2 centuries. Maybe it's time to try something different." The debate continued for hours. Some aliens were interested in human ideas. Others were horrified by the suggestion of changing ancient military traditions. A few seemed angry that newcomers like humans thought they could solve problems that had existed for centuries. Finally, Admiral Kethvar called for quiet. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked Hayes. Hayes looked around the table at all the alien faces. Some looked hopeful. Others looked worried. All of them looked tired of fighting an endless war. "Give us a small fleet," she said. "Give us 6 months. Let us show you how humans fight wars." General Zixathala's mandibles clicked rapidly. "And you believe you can accomplish what we have not in 2 centuries?" "I believe we can end this war," Hayes said confidently. "Not just win battles. End the whole thing." The room fell silent again. The idea was so strange, so foreign to their way of thinking, that many aliens couldn't even understand what Hayes meant. Admiral Kethvar's feathers were completely flat against his head now. "How?" Hayes smiled. "By fighting a different war than the one you've been fighting." 6 weeks later, the human task force gathered at a secret alliance base far from the main war zone. The base was old and mostly empty, perfect for what the humans had planned. Admiral Hayes looked at her fleet of 30 ships floating in the darkness of space. To most observers, the human ships looked like toys compared to the massive Alliance battleships. Each human vessel was about the size of a large fighter craft. They had thin armor, small crews, and weapons that seemed almost pitiful next to the giant cannons on Alliance dreadnoughts. "Are you sure about this?" Admiral Kethvar asked Hayes, over the communication link. He was watching from the main Alliance fleet, hundreds of light years away. "Your ships look so small." Hayes smiled as she stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Swift Strike. Captain Tony Mitchell was at the helm, his hands dancing over controls that could make the ship move faster than anything the aliens had ever seen. "Size isn't everything," Hayes replied. "Sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest door." The human fleet was organized completely differently from Alliance forces. Instead of one massive formation, they were split into 6 small groups of 5 ships each. Each group could operate independently, making their own decisions without waiting for orders from headquarters. "Remember the plan," Hayes broadcast to all human ships. "We're not here to fight their fleet. We're here to make their fleet useless. Hit fast, hit hard, and be gone before they know what happened." Lieutenant Colonel Mary Jackson was monitoring enemy positions from the intelligence ship Nighthawk. Her screen showed Corvani forces spread across 12 star systems, exactly where they had been for the past 2 years. "First target confirmed," she announced. "Corvani Supply Depot at Kepler Station. 3 heavy cruisers on patrol. Standard defensive formation. Reinforcements are 18 hours away at maximum speed." Captain Steve Parker commanded Strike Group Alpha, 6 ships that would hit the first target. His team had practiced this attack hundreds of times in simulation. They knew exactly what to do. "All ships jump in 30 seconds, Parker ordered. "Remember, we're in and out in 4 hours maximum. No heroes, no last stands. We complete the mission and go home." The human ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving empty space behind them. For the first time in over 200 years, Alliance forces were about to attack in a completely new way. Meanwhile, at Kepler Station, the Corvani garrison was having a normal, boring day. Commander Thex Kalar was reviewing supply reports in his office. The station had enough fuel and ammunition to supply the Corvani fleet for 6 months. It was one of their most important bases. "Sir," his communications officer called, "we're detecting hyperspace disturbances. Ships coming out of jump." Thex Kalar wasn't worried. Ships arrived and left every day. "How many?" 6 small vessels, unknown configuration. The Corvani commander frowned. 6 ships wasn't enough to threaten his station. His 3 cruisers could handle 6 enemy ships easily. But he had never seen ships like these before. "All ships, this is Human Strike Group Alpha," came a broadcast on all frequencies. "You have 60 seconds to evacuate non-essential personnel from the supply depot. This is your only warning." Thex Kalar stared at his communication panel. Humans. He had heard about the new species that joined the Alliance, but he had never seen them in combat. 60 seconds? What kind of attack could be completed in 60 seconds? He was about to find out. The human ships moved faster than anything the Corvani had ever encountered. They didn't approach slowly and carefully like Alliance forces usually did. Instead, they accelerated to maximum speed immediately, splitting into 3 pairs that attacked from different directions. Captain Parker's ship launched 12 small missiles at the fuel storage tanks. The missiles weren't very big, but they were incredibly accurate and very fast. Before the Corvani defense systems could react, half the station's fuel supplies were burning. The other human ships hit the ammunition depot, the repair facilities, and the communication array. Each attack was precise and devastating. They didn't waste time shooting at heavily armored targets. Instead, they hit the soft, important parts that kept the base running. The 3 Corvani cruisers tried to respond, but the human ships were already leaving. The entire attack had lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. "What just happened?" Thex Kalar asked his tactical officer. "The supply depot is destroyed, sir. Fuel storage is gone. Ammunition depot is gone. Repair facilities are offline. Communications are down." The Corvani commander looked at his screens in shock. In less than 4 minutes, 6 tiny ships had done more damage than most Alliance attacks accomplished in months. But this was just the beginning. Over the next month, human strike groups hit 17 different targets. Supply depots, communication relays, fuel refineries, and repair stations all across Corvani space. Each attack followed the same pattern: appear suddenly, hit precisely, disappear immediately. The psychological effect was devastating. Corvani forces had grown used to slow, predictable warfare. They knew that when Alliance forces attacked, they would have weeks or months to prepare defenses and call for reinforcements. The human attacks gave them no time to react. Commander Julie Brooks, monitoring Corvani communications from her intelligence ship, reported increasing panic in enemy transmissions. "They're trying to guard everything at once," she told Admiral Hayes. "They're spreading their fleet thin, trying to protect every single base and depot. Their main battle formations are falling apart." Hayes nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. How are our casualties? 0 deaths, sir. We've had some minor equipment damage, but every ship and crew member is still operational. This was the part that amazed the Alliance observers most. Admiral Kethvar had been watching the human operations with growing disbelief. In 1 month of continuous combat, you have suffered no losses? He asked Hayes during their weekly communication. We don't stay around long enough to take losses, Captain Mitchell explained from the bridge of the swift strike. Traditional military thinking says you advance, hold ground, and fight for control of territory. We advance, complete our objective, and leave. If they want the territory, they can have it. We only care about the infrastructure. The human strategy was working better than anyone had imagined. Corvani fleets designed for long campaigns found themselves unable to operate effectively without fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Ships that could fight for months were useless if they couldn't refuel. Major Kevin White, analyzing the results from his logistics ship, presented his findings to the human command staff. The Corvani military system depends completely on secure supply lines, he explained. For 2 centuries, nobody has ever attacked their rear areas. Every depot, every fuel station, every repair facility has minimal defenses because they never needed them. Hayes studied the tactical displays showing Corvani fleet positions. The enemy formations were becoming scattered and defensive, trying to protect supply lines they had never had to worry about before. They've been fighting the same war for so long, she said. They forgot there were other ways to fight. The war was about to change forever. 5 months after the human campaign began, something unprecedented happened. The Corvani Empire sent a message directly to the Alliance High Command. It wasn't a battle challenge or a demand for surrender. It was a request for peace talks. Admiral Hayes received the news while standing on the bridge of the swift strike. Her task force had just completed their 43rd successful strike, this time against a major Corvani shipyard that had been building warships for over a century. They want to talk? Captain Mitchell asked in disbelief. After 5 months? Hayes looked at the message on her screen. The formal diplomatic language couldn't hide the desperation behind it. The Corvani weren't asking for peace talks because they were feeling generous. They were asking because their military machine was falling apart. Sir, reported Commander Brooks from the intelligence station, our communications intercepts show massive confusion in Corvani command structure. They're pulling ships from the front lines to guard supply depots. Their main battle fleets are at 60% strength because they can't get fuel and ammunition. The human strategy had worked exactly as planned. By attacking infrastructure instead of fleets, they had made it impossible for the Corvani military to function effectively. The enemy still had most of their warships, but warships without fuel were just expensive pieces of metal floating in space. 3 days later, Ambassador Carol Turner arrived at Neutral Station Gamma, a small outpost between Alliance and Corvani space. She had been chosen to represent humanity in the peace negotiations because of her skill with alien psychology. The Corvani delegation was already waiting when she arrived. War leader Thexmore looked nothing like the proud military commander he had been 5 months earlier. His ceremonial armor was dull and his bearing suggested a being under enormous stress. Ambassador Turner, he said through his translator. Thank you for agreeing to these talks. Turner took her seat across from the Corvani delegation. The room was simple and plain, with no decorations or symbols of either side. It was designed to be neutral territory where ancient enemies could meet safely. War leader Thexmore, she replied formally. I understand you wish to discuss ending this conflict. The Corvani leader's head tentacles moved in what Turner recognized as a gesture of resignation in his species. This war has become impossible to continue, he said slowly. Your forces have made traditional military operations too costly to sustain. Turner nodded but said nothing. She had been briefed on Corvani psychology. They respected strength and directness, but they also valued honor and dignity. The key was to let them surrender without feeling humiliated. Our military advisors tell us that adapting to your new fighting methods would require rebuilding our entire fleet. Thexmore continued. This would take decades and cost more than our economy can handle. This was the heart of the matter. The humans had never been strong enough to defeat the Corvani Empire in direct combat, but they had made the war so expensive that continuing it would bankrupt both sides. The Alliance is interested in lasting peace, Turner said carefully. Peace that addresses the causes of this conflict, not just the symptoms. Over the next 2 weeks, the negotiations moved faster than anyone had expected. Unlike previous peace talks that had dragged on for years, these discussions focused on practical solutions rather than ancient grievances. The breakthrough came when human economists presented their analysis of what both sides could gain from trade instead of war. Captain Dan Rogers, who had been studying Corvani industrial capacity, showed how their heavy manufacturing could complement human innovation and speed. Your people are excellent at building large, durable structures, Rogers explained to the Corvani delegation. Our people are good at building small, fast, efficient systems. Together, we could create technologies that neither side could develop alone. War leader Thexmore studied the proposals with interest. For the first time in months, he looked hopeful rather than defeated. You are suggesting that we could profit more from cooperation than from conquest? He asked. Much more, Turner confirmed. The resources both sides have spent on this war could have built wonders. Imagine what we could accomplish if we worked together instead of against each other. The Corvani delegation spent 3 days in private discussions. When they returned, Thexmore carried a formal document. The Corvani High Council has authorized me to agree to these terms, he announced. The war is over. The news spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communication networks could carry it. The longest war in recorded galactic history had ended not with a massive battle or heroic sacrifice, but with a simple recognition that there was a better way. Admiral Kethvar was among the first to congratulate Admiral Hayes when the news reached the Alliance fleet. 5 months, he said, his feathers arranged in a pattern of amazement. You ended a 200-year war in 5 months. Hayes smiled. We didn't end it by being stronger or smarter than everyone else. We ended it by asking a different question. What question? Instead of asking, how do we win battles, we asked, how do we end the war? The answer turned out to be simpler than anyone thought. Back on Earth, the news was received with quiet satisfaction rather than wild celebration. Captain Lisa Anderson, who had served throughout the campaign, wrote in her final report. The war didn't end because we developed better weapons or built stronger ships. It ended because we refused to accept that the way things had always been done was the way they had to continue being done. The peace treaty included provisions for technology sharing, trade agreements, and joint exploration missions. The Corvani would contribute their expertise in large-scale construction and manufacturing, while humans offered their innovations in rapid deployment and adaptive problem-solving. Within a year, former enemies were working together on projects that benefited both civilizations. Corvani engineering combined with human creativity produced advances in space travel, energy production, and communication that neither side could have achieved alone. The human approach became a case study in military academies across the galaxy. Not because it was particularly brilliant or complex, but because it demonstrated the power of questioning basic assumptions. Admiral Kethvar, writing his memoirs years later, captured what many aliens felt about the human intervention. They saw our war not as a sacred duty or honored tradition, but as a problem to be solved. Once we started thinking of it that way, the solution became obvious. The humans didn't win because they were better warriors. They won because they were better at ending wars than fighting them. The galaxy learned an important lesson about the difference between fighting conflicts and resolving them. Sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply the willingness to think differently about old problems. Other conflicts throughout Alliance space began to reconsider their own situations. If the longest war in history could end in 5 months, perhaps other impossible problems weren't as hopeless as they seemed. Years later, when young beings across the galaxy studied this period in their history classes, they would learn that the most important battles were often won not on battlefields, but in the minds of those brave enough to imagine a different future. The peace lasted, and both civilizations prospered. The war that had seemed eternal was over, ended not by force, but by the simple human belief that there had to be a better way.